Hi, James.
Hey, man.
Hi. Well, you grew up in Hitchin.
I did, yeah.
Was there much music around over there?
And Hitchin, well, in a way. I feel, on the one hand, I feel like, and this probably just relates to kind of my generation of like 14 to 15-year-olds, because that's the age I was at the time. I feel like, I was very much, with the band or the bands that I was in over that period of time, like, 14 to 17, I feel like I was kind of the music scene. We were the music scene. And one or two others around us, we were the kind of music scene of Hitchin at the time. But also, I suppose there is music in Hitchin for two other reasons, which are pretty substantial. Hitchin owns one of the oldest folk clubs. Hitchin Folk Club has been around. I say one of the oldest. I know it's been around since the sort of 60s, and from back then there's a lot of important folk artists that have come through and played there. And then also there's something called Rhythms of the World Festival, which for a time was the largest free music festival in Europe, because it used to happen throughout the town, the whole town, like all the high streets and the town square. They'd build stages, and everybody would sort of swarm in, and there was like tens of thousands of people that would come in and see all this music across a weekend. And it had to go away for a bit, the festival. They couldn't do it for a couple of years, and then recently it came back, and they hold it in this huge field now. So there's that music in Hitchin.
Were there any performances that you saw while growing up? Maybe in a folk club, or maybe at the festival?
What did I see? I mean, there was loads of great music. Not necessarily that kind of affected my own music, but the general, like, the aspect, like the the thing that is live music and a live show. Whatever the band or whatever the artist or whatever the genre has always affected me.
Why?
Why? Sorry.
Why?
It's just so it's simple. It's such an exciting event, and the way that the connection between the act and the audience. There's this big space in between the two people, and there's so much in that space. There's so much pulling, one to the other. And it's all because of these incredible sounds, whichever sounds they may be, guitars, drums, or something completely different. It's just a fascinating, magical thing.
You said a magical thing. What was that something, because you mentioned, 14, 15, were you born over there too, or were you born somewhere?
Yeah, I was born, there's a town, the nearest hospital is in a town next to Hitchin.
Okay. But before you entered the band, what was your first connection to music and playing an instrument?
It was through, when I was a little kid. TV was one thing. The radio was always on as well. My parents would play music kind of at the weekends from time to time. It wasn't, they weren't playing it all the time, but yeah, it was like kind of TV, radio, and my parents really, early on.
Yeah.
I remember VH1, I remember seeing like Michael Jackson and Bruce Springsteen, who, if it was the early 90s when I was watching this stuff, they'd had huge careers, particularly in the late 80s.
Yeah.
And, I was seeing this footage of these amazing, enormous venues, like, it was outdoor, it was like stadiums, arenas, and probably big fields for someone like Springsteen or someone like that. Huge crowds, great songs, and they were just amazing performers. So, it was those kind of things that, again, really affected me, and I just, remember being kind of almost hypnotized by what was going on, the things I was hearing, a little more than the things I was seeing, but it was both of them that grabbed me. And yeah, my parents were playing music. My mum was always into soul stuff, soul music and Motown. My dad was into rock and roll, like the Stones and Springsteen, people like that. And it was one weekend my dad was playing, he put on Layla by Derek and the Dominoes, Eric Clapton. And it kind of knocked me out, I just sort of went, what is this? This is like the best thing I've ever heard. And I was moving from being like a 7, 8-year-old into pop music. I'd always loved, I remember when the Black Eyed Peas, their first song came on the radio, and I was like probably like 9 years old, and I thought it was great. But suddenly, you know, I grew up a little bit with my sort of taste and the things I was looking for and wanting to hear. And he played that, and it just did everything for me. And
in hindsight, with what you know now, how come this song grabbed you so much?
It's just a guitar riff. It's straight away the guitar riff, and I know it's down to the sound, you know, the pairing of that amp and that guitar, and you know, the environment. You know, I've watched documentaries on it. The producer Tom Dowd, there's a great documentary of his all about his life, and it touches on recording Layla and other assorted love songs, and recording Layla, that track specifically. And it's the performance as much as anything else. There's such fire in that riff. It's just so kind of, there's so much energy, and it just did it, you know.
Was this the moment that made you decide to play guitar? Or?
It was essentially, you know, it was essentially the moment I said, I was kind of aware, and I had to sort of check with my dad, that there was a guitar, you know, in the vicinity, and it was this sort of broken up old one it wasn't in great shape. And it was in the cupboard in the spare room. And you know, we got it out, and it was all dusty, and it wasn't really working, and it had like 4 or 5 strings on it. And so I said, I got to do this, you know, because the moment I held it like that, and I had that song in my head, Layla, you know, everything just felt amazing. And so we had to run down to the guitar shop in town, get it fixed up, get it restrung, and I was ready to go. And for some crazy reason, I don't know why, but I bought a CD-ROM, and that was my first, you know, I put it in the computer. That was my first attempt at learning to actually play. It didn't work. It didn't, nah.
Do you know, I guess you don't know, but do you know the date, the exact date maybe, that you bought the guitar? Or?
Oh, well, I kind of found the guitar. I mean, I don't know if I can even remember the month. I was 11, so it was some point between the end of 2001 and the beginning of 2002. Yeah, it was somewhere in there.
And how did you pick it up from there? Were you actually?
Well, yeah, I tried that CD-ROM, didn't work. That was like teaching you how to do things that were really boring. Mm-hmm. So I went and tried some guitar lessons, and you know, they lasted for a minute, and I just didn't have the attention span. It was that real young teenager, like kid thing of being so obsessed, but having none of the patience to sit down and quietly, patiently, listen to how it's done. So the best way for me, and the most immediate way, was to put records on. Yeah. You know, so I went back and I put Layla on, and I was like, my dad was like, "This is the Rolling Stones," and you know, this is like Lynyrd Skynyrd and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and we'd put them on. I would put them on in my room, shut the door, and just work it out.
What was the first riff you could play then?
The first riff I learned to play. You know, it was that classic 12-bar blues. Ja-jang, 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 ja-jang. You know, it was that really. That was one of the first ones, and that again, you know, just blues music. You know, the 12-bar blues. You know, the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. Just the way that they come round, and the fact that just repeats on itself, and it's got it's so emotive. Yeah. That was one of the first things I learned to play, and there was a bass line that kind of went with it that I learned to play on the guitar. The boom, 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 boom. You know, I play that round this sort of single line melody. Just did everything for me. I used to love that.
And when in your learning process were you able to play the riff of?
Oh, Layla. I guess pretty soon after, sometime in the months following that. It was one of the first things that I learned to play, but I did feel like, you know, in reality, when it came down to it, I felt like that was a little bit advanced for someone who literally never learned to play the guitar before. So I got a few simpler things under my fingers first, and it wasn't long before I was working hard to get that right, and eventually I did. Yeah, it wasn't long, you know, 2 or 3 months or so.